Hello everyone, I am Sandra Campbell-Notice. Thank you for joining me in Kids Village for story time. I want you to think for a moment about what it's like growing up in your home or in your community. Who do you live with? How would you describe your community? Have you ever thought about how your life is different from that of people in other communities? When I was a little girl, I lived with my grandmother in a rural community called Epping Farm on the island of Jamaica. Rural for me meant it was a farming community. We had no electricity, no paved roads, no running water. We never had television, computers, or telephones. The story I will read took place during that time. It is inspired by my grandmother and captures some of the special memories I have of her. Listen as I read and see if it will help you recall some memories with your grandmother. Here we go. My Caribbean Grandma, written by Sandra Campbell-Notice, illustrated by Anura Sinrath. The book is dedicated to my maternal grandmother, Timinisha A. Stewart Thomas, and to my daughters, Tanisha and Natasha, who encourage me every day to do my best. My Caribbean Grandma. Miss Timinisha Stewart Thomas was my Caribbean grandma. She was a shy, loving, patient, and dedicated woman who always wore a smile on her face. When I think of my grandma, I'm reminded of her long, thick black hair, her short, plump body, and her round face. Her skin was the perfect blend of the brown, rich soil, and her loving eyes seemed to twinkle just like the rays of sunshine glistening on the waters of the Caribbean Sea. Grandma was an extremely hardworking woman. As soon as the sun rose over the Blue Mountains, she cooked a healthy breakfast over the open fire for the family. What kinds of foods do you have for breakfast in the mornings? Well, my grandma would cook green bananas, callaloo and saltfish, and make a cup of peppermint tea. After breakfast, she would gather buckets of water, clean the house and yard, and then we would all go to the gardens to tend to the crops. Most of Grandma's day would be spent inspecting or picking fruits, pulling weeds from the garden, tilling the soil, transplanting crops. While Grandma did her chores, my brother, sister, and I would make sure that all of the plants got enough water to keep them healthy and growing. Do you see Grandma here tilling the soil? When the fruits and vegetables were ready, Grandma would spend hours harvesting them. My brother and sister would help her to pull the carrots, turnips, and beets from the ground. Guess what I did while they were doing that? My favorite thing to do was to pull the thyme from the ground and put the bundles in a basket nearby. I would sometimes glance at my grandmother and smile to myself. After we took the crops home, my brother, sister, and I would help Grandma wash the vegetables in a large tub of water, then pack them into little bundles into bags ready for the market. The look on Grandma's face as we sorted and packed the crops was one filled with delight. The crops she had planted, cared for, and harvested were now ready for others to enjoy. She was now more than anxious to go to the market in the city to sell her crops. Early on a Thursday morning, Grandma would get ready for her trip to the market. She would cook our breakfast, then iron her favorite plaid dress. The dress was the folk attire for most of the women who lived on the island and was worn whenever they went to the market. Along with the dress, Grandma would put on her brown stockings, lace up her black shoes. Then she would tie her head with a scarf that matched her dress, and a plait of her thick black hair would be left out just above her forehead. Do you see that? And guess what this is over my shoulder today? This is Grandma's scarf. This is a scarf she actually wore to the market whenever she would go to sell her crops. It is one of my very special possessions that I will never get rid of. While Grandma dressed for the market, my brother, sister, and I placed all the bags and baskets at the front gate, waiting for the Land Rover Jeep to arrive. The city market was one of the busiest and most colorful places in the city. It was like a beautiful mural, and Grandma always enjoyed going there. The large open-air structure built of concrete and wood was always filled with people buying and selling a variety of items. The colors of the fruits, vegetables, and clothes were everywhere. Not only was the market colorful, but it was also a very noisy place with people talking, laughing, bargaining, arguing. Sometimes people would even be very playful, teasing each other and running through the stalls. Although my grandma was a bit timid, she would always fit in with the crowd. At Grandma's wooden stall, she greeted her customers with a cheerful smile as she said hello to each one. The customers would purchase the things she had taken to the market: the rosemary, scallions, carrots, turnips, beets, and Scotch bonnet peppers. Some customers would bargain with Grandma for a lower price, and if she were in the mood, she would sell them for that low price and then say to them, "You got a bargain." Saturday evening is when Grandma would return home from the market. When my brother, sister, and I heard the horn of the Jeep blowing, we would run to the front of the gate to greet Grandma. Guess what we would grab as she got off that Jeep? We would grab the bags quickly because we thought our good treats were there. We would unload the bags as we got to the house, and we would find milk, flour, cornmeal, rice, meat, fish, and all kinds of things that Grandma had brought back home. What treat did Grandma bring for us this time? Well, she brought candy, coconut cakes, and fried sprats. We ate our tasty treats in seconds, and Grandma smiled. As we sat comfortable around Grandma's feet, our faces lit up listening to the stories about her trip to the market. She told us about the journey going and coming on the pack Jeep and where there was usually not much room for anyone to breathe. She told us about the people she saw in the market, who she spoke to, what she ate, and we always wanted to know if our older cousin who now lived in the city had visited her. If she said he did, we would smile broadly. Grandma told us that because of heavy rains in the lower part of the community, it was dangerous for the Jeep to drive through the Yalis River. It was deep, wide, and high, so she and the other woman had to walk across the bridge to transfer all their supplies on the big Leland truck that was waiting on the other side of the river. Do you think they were scared to cross that river? Many of the ladies, she said, were scared to walk across the river because it was so huge and muddy. They wondered, what if the bridge collapsed and we fall in? That thought alone made them not want to walk across the bridge, but the men who were nearby helped them to walk across safely. Grandma said she was scared, but tried not to think about the danger. She held on tightly to one of the men and told him if she fell in, he would be going too. That made everyone close to her laugh out loud. We were always excited to hear stories about Grandma's adventurous journey to the market. That night, as we went to sleep, I thought about the garden, the Jeep, the market, the river, the truck, the stories, and my wonderful grandma who slept quietly beside me. I saw many pictures in my head and wondered when I would go to the market with my grandmother to see all the things she had seen. Well, Weeks would pass, and Grandma would plant and harvest more crops. And when they were ready, she was again ready to make another trip to the market. It was a never-ending cycle for the woman who lived in our community. We got a surprise. On this trip, my sister and I would go with Grandma to the market. We were excited. It was our turn to have an adventure with my Caribbean grandma. Did you enjoy the story? I hope you did. Thank you for joining me in Kids Village.